let's start talking about setup and how we start setting up that initial company. So the first thing we're going to look at is setting up our transactional reports. So those are sales documents and purchase orders. So if we go to our gear in the top right, we will go ahead and start with our sales document types. So we support multiple sales document types. Some of those coordinate with what you can do within QuickBooks Online. Some of them do not. So we support estimates or quotes. You can name them whatever you like. We support invoices, sales receipts, returns, and sales refund receipts as well. The one that we add to that is not in QuickBooks Online that enterprise customers would understand or would be familiar with would be a sales order. So on the left-hand side, we create these by default whenever you create a new company. So you get one of each that we create as a default setup. You can then go in and make changes to those or add additional ones. So again, thinking about sales channels, multiple sales channels. So if you have POS transactions, if you have manually call center where you're manually creating sales transactions, if you have e-com orders that are coming over from Shopify, you may want to create sales transactions or sales documents that represent each one of those sales channels. And so you could do that here. Otherwise, these individual documents or the ones that we create by default may be sufficient for you. So if we look at our left-hand side, I can create or select each one of these. You'll notice that my menu options change. I select on an invoice. I have a set of items that I can change or modify for that. Also on an order, there are some additional things that I can do there. I can rename this sales document type at any time. This is specific again to this company. So I could change this if I like to use quotes or the term quote as opposed to estimate. I can make the change. Again, in this setup screen, we do have a save button. So once you have made that change, it does require you to click save for those changes to take effect. And you'll now notice that it has renamed on the left-hand side to quote. So again, there are a couple of things here that we want to talk about. We do have, again, it doesn't make sense on a quote. We'll jump over to an order and concentrate mostly on that. So we have our fulfillment method. So we can control how this document and when this document gets fulfilled. Again, keeping in mind that allocation and fulfillment are separate, we also do have an allocation method. So the way that you differentiate the two, allocation happens at the location level, and then fulfillment happens at a deeper level. So if you're using, it becomes more important if you're using serialized lot tracked, or if you're running multi-bin, a warehouse with multiple bins, and you need to fulfill down to that level. It's at that point that a separate fulfillment process may make, or a manual fulfillment process may make sense. Another time that we see, or other times that we see fulfillment method change to manual is when you have your warehouse users using a data collection device to do manual or to do a separate fulfillment process. That is something that we do support in cloud. We do have a data collection module or mobile module that the users can make use of that allows them to do that picking process or fulfillment process on a sales transaction. And if you are wanting to use that, then you are going to want to have your fulfillment method set to manual in that scenario. If allocation and fulfillment are both set to auto, once the sales line is, or the item is added as a sales line onto the sales document, the system will attempt to allocate and fulfill that line immediately. So essentially as saved, but again, with cloud, we make a save attempt each time you change that document. So you do have control over when both allocation and fulfillment happens. If you decide, and again, fulfillment is dependent on allocation. So you can't fulfill a sales line unless that sales line has been allocated already. So you have the option to set allocation methods. You can set auto, you can set manual, you can even set it to not allowed. And that would mean that this document would never be, this sales order would never be allowed to allocate. There's not a lot of good use cases for not allowed, but it is something that we have seen used in the past, and so it is available there. Most of the times we see both auto and manual. So then if allocation method is set to manual and fulfillment method is also set to manual, then it becomes a two-step process. Before you can manually fulfill that document, a user would have to go in and allocate that sales order. And again, allocation reserves that inventory at the location level. Fulfillment then picks the specific inventory cost stack to use for that specific sales transaction. For most scenarios though, we're going to see this set to auto. On top of that, we also have the ability to set separate fulfillment methods for both serial and lot controlled items. So there are scenarios where I have inventory that is serial tracked. I also have inventory that is not serial tracked. And for those non-serial tracked items, I may want the system to automatically fulfill those. But then for my serialized items, I want to manually pick which serial numbers I'm sending to that customer for this specific order. So in that case, I can set my serial lot fulfillment to manual. So that would then, again, give me the support or allow me to support that specific scenario where on adding a non-serial tracked line, the document or that line will attempt it to be allocated and fulfilled. And then I add my serialized item, and then that line would be allocated, but would have to be manually fulfilled, which I would have to manually pick a serial number for that specific line. Again, by default, those are all set to auto. So if you don't have any of those other scenarios and you just want the system to automatically allocate and fulfill, you have to make no changes. It'll just work for you out of the box. Sales type for this is always going to default to order. Again, because I have my default order that is set, that's more relevant to when I'm adding a new sales document type. Workflow is something we're going to talk about in just a little while. Again, we do default in a workflow for you. It defaults to this sales workflow. If I had multiple workflows set up, I could go pick those out of my list at this time. Again, because this is a sales order, I can then determine what sales transaction or type of sales transaction I want to transfer this order to. And in this case, we have a default invoice that was created, and we go ahead and set that as the default for can transfer to. So you can have multiple selections here. So if you had multiple different invoice types and you wanted your user to pick the invoice type that you transferred to, or the named invoice type to transfer to, then you could select multiples here. Again, that's something that we see or have seen used in the past. It's not something we see used very often. We also have our standard Pio type, and again, we default that in because we also create default purchase order types for you as well. One other option, or a couple other settings that we have on the right hand side here, allow payments. So again, checkbox is checked, then that means that the payments tab will show on the sales transaction, and the users can then add manual payments, or if they have an integration for Notice Pay Fabric, they would be able to use Notice Pay Fabric and apply process credit card transactions and apply those directly to that document. Can ship. This enables our integration to ShipStation. With that checked, we have an action available at the header of the sales document that allows the user to, it's a ship button, they would be able to press ship, and that would integrate or send over that sales transaction to ShipStation, allowing them to then process that through their carrier and send that information back to us once it is shipped. Can post, you'll notice it's grayed out, or I get the red the red circle with a slash through it, showing that I can't mark it. There's only certain transactions that are postable. That would be an invoice, that would be a sales receipt, that would be a return, and that would be a refund. Those are the only postable transactions. Therefore, quotes, orders, you cannot post those. And again, posting is what signifies I'm ready for that transaction to be sent over to QBO or be marked as ready to integrate over to QuickBooks Online. Shown means that this transaction or this type of transaction is available to be picked from the customer card when I go to my drop-down, and I can select from that drop-down. If for some reason, so again, really this is more applicable to orders that are coming in through some form of integration. So Shopify, I may not want my users to, I may create a completely separate sales document type, an order sales document for Shopify orders, and I never want my users to manually create an order within Cloud of using the Shopify order type. And so I can mark it as shown or uncheck the shown box, so that way it's not available in any of my drop downs when I go to create a new transaction. Can dropship enables dropshipping support on a sales transaction for those sales lines. And you'll notice that once I check that box, it does add this additional dropship Pio type dropdown. So again, just like the standard Pio type dropdown, if I have multiple different dropship Pio types set up, I would then be able to select those out of the list and pick which one I want to be able to use against this sales order. Can purchase, essentially you'll see that gets flagged by default, and that enables or disables the standard Pio type. So if you never want, or if you're never going to use a SOP to POP scenario where you need to do purchasing or create purchase orders off of a sales transaction, then you can uncheck both the can dropship, can purchase flags. Then your users would never even see the purchase option from the document. And then the inactive flag is essentially what it says. It marks that order type or that document type as inactive, no longer visible in my workflow over on the left-hand side, no longer visible in any of my drop-downs. So again, it's different than shown in that shown is those documents are active documents. You can create new documents with them from some integrations point, whereas inactive means I can't even create new documents for that at that point going forward. Again, any changes that you make to this screen, you're going to want to make sure you click Save, and you'll get the message at the top showing that they were successfully saved. The document types that we typically see used within a standard distribution environment would be a quote, order, invoice, and return. Typically, we are going to go into sales receipts and mark those as inactive or just mark them as not shown, as well as refunds. The differences, again, those are QBO transactions. So if you're not familiar with the difference in those on the QBO side, a sales receipt and a sales receipt or a sales refund receipt, those transactions are, when posted or sent to QBO, are assumed to be paid in full. So what that means is I can't take a sales receipt and apply it to a customer's account with terms. So I can't post it with, you know, a net 30-day payment term on it. It's going to go over, QBO is going to assume it's been paid in full, even though there may not be a payment transaction listed on that document. The assumption is that it's paid in full. You've collected all of your funds, and so you're going to have different distributions, different journal entries that happen with those transactions. And so in a lot of just true distribution environments outside of POS, we're going to typically disable those so they're not shown and or marked as inactive. So those are our different sales document types. Again, I can always go and create a new sales order type or any sales transaction type. So if I wanted this to be my Shopify order. So when we're creating new, we do have the option of specifying GL accounts based off the name or based off of the number of the segment. In this case, we typically don't use this a whole lot now, so we'll leave that just disabled. We can also set our allocation method. Again, I'm going to have both of these set to auto by default. We can specify what we're going to transfer this to. Any of these fields that I leave blank, I can then go back and change those at a later date or after I've saved the transaction. So again, don't feel like you have to set each one of these as you're setting up this document. I'm going to make this an order. I am going to have this auto fulfill serial lots. I don't have separate workflows set up at this time, so I'm going to leave that blank as well. And then I can set all of my drop. But we also have a quantity options field. That field will, it's a discarded field. We're not going to be using that anymore, so it will be dropping off this screen. And then I can also set any of my additional options here below. So I want it to be active, but I don't want it to be shown, so I'm going to leave that unchecked. I do want to be able to ship these transactions. I don't need to purchase off of these transactions, so I'll leave that. And I don't need to add payments again because this is coming over from Shopify. I'm going under the assumption that Shopify took that payment at the time of checkout on the website. I do have to specify an account. You'll notice that I left that field blank and it gave me the red box at the top. It's a good example of what happens when you don't fill in a required field. We're going to tell you that there at the top. So you do have to pick one. Again, it's not really used. So we'll go ahead and pick that, save it, and then I have my new Shopify order that shows up on the left-hand side. So again, I may want this transferred to the same invoice, which I can have, or I could create a new invoice type that is specific for my Shopify orders. Again, they're two separate sales transactions. So I also will likely want to go back. You'll notice that I did not check shown when I set it up, but then we're going to then check that by default. So I typically will go back, uncheck it, save it. And so now, again, the document is active. It can be created through the API or through integrations. It just cannot be created manually by a user off of the customer card or off of the sales document search screen. And so again, make sure that's saved. I think I already clicked it once, but we'll just click it again to make sure that we're good there. And then if we go over to sales, those documents would show up here. But again, I should not have Shopify orders that show here. So then if we flip back to our setup screen, so just kind of to show you essentially what that does, I'm going to mark it as shown now, save that one, go back to sales, and then under my new transactions, you'll now see Shopify order.